Hey there and welcome back to Rimworld. My name is Pete and today we complete episode 3 of our Cult of Jinx Rimworld series, now starring not only Spectral Phoenix but also Thoraya, who joined us in the last episode and who might actually stick around if things go our way. So far though, the two ladies have not really gotten off to a great start, as both of them are currently recovering from a bloody fistfight, and considering the severity of their injuries, this could take some time. However, life in the Cold Bog has to continue, of course, and especially our precious Gauranlen Tree has little concern for the well-being of our colonists, so Specs has no choice but to get up to do some pruning work. Thoraya, meanwhile, is sowing out a new batch of rice. Winter is getting closer and temperatures will likely fall below zero soon, but with a bit of luck we should be able to bring in one more harvest. The afternoon, meanwhile, is spent in bed, or at least in our colonists' much more uncomfortable sleeping spots, but the evening meditation is of course mandatory. Our anima tree is up to 5 patches of anima grass at this point, so we are roughly 1/4 towards unlocking psychic abilities. A sleeping turkey nearby then practically invites Specs to do some hunting before she goes to bed, and having slept for most of the afternoon, I think she can stay up a little while longer. On the beach, she can also find an ibex as well as another turkey, and as always, we want to make sure to get the animals to bleed out on their own so that Thoraya is not mad at us for killing them, a mechanic that led to a good bit of humor in the comments of the last episode, and also once again provided some fantastic fan art, which you can see at the end of the video. Now, on the following morning, we have big news at the Gauranlen Tree. Our first Dryad is here. However, at this point it is still in the immature stage, meaning that it immediately enters a Dryad cocoon for 5 more days, from which it will then eventually emerge as a woodmaker Dryad. So this is definitely a process that takes some time and only really becomes worth it once we scale things up a bit, as it is very much possible to have multiple Gauranlen trees. Still, this is a nice milestone in the story of our colony of Liviana, especially since it is now officially the first day of fall. That means temperatures will drop significantly over the next few days, and at the moment wood is really our only source of heat. I have my doubts that the dark torch will be enough once temperatures drop below zero though, so at that point we might have to reactivate the campfire. But until then we take advantage of these still somewhat mild temperatures and collect as many berries and medicine as we can to build our winter stockpile. And that already brings us to another evening, which Specs and Thoraya once again spend at the anima tree, still visibly injured by the way. And on the topic of injuries, the ibex has succumbed to its wounds, so Specs can do some butchering now, after once again switching bedrooms with Thoraya so that we don't disturb her. The next morning then begins with a quest that we all already know too well. This here is one of the ways to end the game, by traveling halfway across the planet and constructing a spaceship, but I think for this series that is not the ending that we are going with. And while temperatures outside are barely above the freezing point, our second small rice harvest has somehow managed to fully mature, so for the moment we are doing pretty well in regards to our food situation. Specs, meanwhile, is bringing home some more steel, and with the rice harvested, Thoraya moves on to berries, but with a bit more steel now available, she can now finally construct that second deadfall trap. After all, it is only going to be a matter of time before the first raid strikes, and if Randy is kind enough to give us so much time before that happens, then the least we can do is prepare ourselves. Of course, that also includes target practice, which Specs gets plenty of here, as she attempts to hunt a few more animals in the forest, and even manages to accidentally kill a turkey outright, so Thoraya will not be amused about that. Unlike Specs' penalty for chopping down trees, however, the mood debuff here only lasts for a few days. In the evening then, with our 2 colonists once again meditating, we receive an interesting quest. If we accept, a weather control system will force a foggy rain on Liviana for 11 days, rather fitting for the Cold Bog, but of course not without its downsides, namely a noticeable accuracy penalty due to low visibility. Still, we are also offered some intriguing rewards here, including our first side trainer for the solar pinhole psycast, so at this point I am not entirely opposed to accepting this quest. But we have 4 days to make a decision, so let's not rush things, especially since waiting until the last second could actually have its advantages, but more on that later. For now, the evening's meditation comes to an end with Specs butchering another accidental kill, which actually provides us with enough leather to make our first proper bedroll. Considering the fact that Specs and Thoraya have been sleeping on the ground so far, this is a huge upgrade, especially for Thoraya, whose ideology sadly does not allow her to simply ignore things like this. For that reason, this bedroll will also be for her, but considering our recent hunting successes, we should have enough materials for a second one soon. On the next morning, we are then deconstructing the remaining granite columns near our base, as we have another small construction project planned. Before we get to that, however, Specs and Thoraya can collect many more berries, which actually already brings us to the late afternoon, where we receive the fantastic news that Specs is finally fully healed again. Thoraya follows suit soon after during the evening's meditation, and things get even better. Another quest pops up, and this one is a no-brainer, I think. Not only will we finally see our first raid of the series, but it will also only consist of one attacker, so it should be fairly manageable. In exchange, we will also receive our third colonist, a 74-year-old man. We can unfortunately not learn anything more about him at this point, but there is a good chance that he has at least a few high-level skills. So let's give our colonists a bit of rest to prepare and then accept this quest on the next morning. It should now only take a short moment, and yes, here we are, the Cult of Jinx welcomes its newest member. As always, chosen from the list of patrons in the naming rights tier and above, our latest recruit gets a new name, and this time the name of patron Maniac was chosen. Now we'll have to see how well that name holds up, but looking at his skills, I think we have a very promising candidate here who should fit right in. Incapable of caring about others and wonderfully proficient in anything violence-related, Maniac could become Liviana's combat powerhouse, not to mention that he is also somewhat capable of doing plant work and a quick sleeper as well. The jealous trait should also not give us too much trouble in the early game, and age-related hearing loss is also not overly problematic, as it mostly concerns social skills like trading and negotiating, and well, to me it looks like Maniac might leave those to other more qualified candidates. Conveniently enough, Maniac also comes with a full suit of winter gear, including a muffalo wool parka, so the steadily decreasing temperatures should not bother him too much. A few seconds later then, the raiding party arrives, a lone woman with a knife. I think we should be able to handle that. While she prepares for the assault, Maniac now joins the Cult of Jinx properly by equipping that second wooden face mask we received from a trade caravan last episode, and then he immediately starts helping out with the harvest. A few hours pass by, and then it's finally time for the big moment. We are about to see our first attack on the colony. Melee fighters up front, Specs and her bow in the back. Let's see how this goes. Alright, that was, well, almost disappointingly quick. No one even sustained a single scratch, and the attacker is killed immediately. That in turn provides a lovely mood boost for our two bloodlusty colonists Specs and Thoraya, while Maniac actually receives a mood penalty. The tree connection meme of the Cult of Jinx is sadly not enough to allow colonists to ignore corpses, but with the way things are going, the first evolution of our ideology might want to address that. Now, since that fight that just took place barely challenged Specs' shooting skills, she will now get a bit more practice against the family of Fatty McCool, while Thoraya and Maniac continue to harvest what's available. Since we are also starting to run out of space soon, we have to make a few changes. That means table and beds all go back into the big shelter, while the smaller one now becomes a storage room. Certainly not the best solution, since our colonists will all have to sleep in the same room, but for now it will have to do. Maniac then also participates in the evening meditation for the first time. He actually joined us as a fully fledged member of the Cult of Jinx, so he can now help grow some anima grass, while Thoraya finally also has a meditation focus of the morbid type for herself after we buried our attacker nearby. For the night then, Specs, Thoraya and Maniac huddle around the dark torch, but again, something a little warmer is probably needed soon. The third pair of helping hands is immediately noticeable though, as Specs begins the next day with pruning work, while Maniac takes over butchering duties. That also gives us enough pigskin to turn Fatty McCool and his friends into some comfortable sleeping bags for Specs and Maniac, so everyone in Liviana can now experience that sleepover feeling, just with a bit more cultism. For the rest of the day, Specs continues to try her best to hunt down a few more boar, but her relatively low shooting skill and the abundance of trees in the way certainly make that a challenging task. Still, every shot helps build some experience, whether it hits or not. Maniac and Thoraya continue foraging, and eventually the entire colony once again meets at the anima tree. Afterwards, everyone can share a meal, and then our three heroes can go to sleep. On the next morning, we once again jump over to the Gauranlen Tree because our Dryad is finally ready to go. Just as a small snowstorm strikes the Cold Bog, our very first woodmaker Dryad emerges from its cocoon, and needless to say, it also needs a new name. This time, the name of patron Kipsor was randomly selected, so congratulations, and I hope you're ready to supply the colony with a steady influx of wood. 32 units every 2 days to be precise, so it will take just a little while longer until we can actually profit off of this. Now, since the first snow has just begun to fall, I think it is time to revisit that weather controller quest. Because if we use this quest to force a foggy rain for the next 11 days, then that weather will override the snow, which itself can cause a few issues as well. So 2 birds with 1 stone or something like that. In any case, we are now accepting this quest for the side trainer, as Solar Pinhole could be very useful in our particular situation, but we'll talk more about that once we can actually use it. The side trainer itself arrives immediately, but without anyone in the colony capable of casting psychic abilities, we have to put it into storage for now. And yes, you did just see some flirting between Maniac and Thoraya. We'll see how that story develops. Now, it doesn't take long until the new weather has fully set in and the map is shrouded in thick fog and heavy rain, not to mention that even during the day, temperatures are now at the point where hypothermia could become an issue, at least for Specs and Thoraya, with the latter actually still wearing her tattered muffalo wool toque, as that does not inhibit her nudist way of life and gives her at least a little bit of cold protection. In that state, fully naked except for the toque, Thoraya now joins Maniac to collect a bit more granite. After all, I did mention a small construction project a few moments ago, and for that we need exactly 75 units worth of it. However, there are priorities to keep, and so instead of assembling anything, the cultists of Liviana spend the evening sitting in the rain, worshipping the anima tree, or the grave of a fallen raider in Thoraya's case. Anima grass progress is at 9 by the way, so the addition of a second nature-spirited colonist is certainly noticeable, and I am fairly optimistic that we should have our first psycast by the end of the next episode. For the evening then, it is once again time to get cozy. I actually really like this setup of having everyone sleep tightly together, although our colonists of course have a slightly different opinion. On the next morning then, we are once again committing a bit more blasphemy, if you will, as Specs is chopping down a tree. Not only does this increase our growing area, but it also gives us enough wood to make a second short bow, something that Maniac could certainly use to assist with hunting during the winter. Speaking of which, while Thoraya starts crafting, Specs once again pays a visit to the group of boar, who honestly should be running at the mere sight of her by now, but I guess the poor shooting performances of the past have kept the animals confident. Specs' shots will also certainly not get any more precise anytime soon. Not only does the fog play a role here, but Specs is also beginning to suffer from mild hypothermia. After all, a suit of tribal wear only gets you so far, especially if it's made from bird skin, but that is why we collected all of that granite. Not to make Specs a full suit of granite armor, of course, but instead to construct a research bench. And having just finished the short bow, Maniac now also has access to a ranged weapon, and woodmaker Dryad Kipsaw has also just produced its first batch of wood. Not enough to make a bow with, which is why that tree earlier had to go, but enough to hopefully allow us to refrain from chopping down any more anytime soon. The research bench meanwhile gets built outside. That is however not its final place. Thankfully, it is now possible to move research benches even without mods installed, so we don't have to think too many steps ahead here. Space is going to be a concern nonetheless, which is why we are now deconstructing that big table before finishing the research bench, and with the steel, Thoraya can then construct a smaller table at the edge of the room, freeing up some space that, as you can see, we desperately need. We are in fact also able to harvest some more rice at this point, because whenever temperatures were above 0, the plants here did grow just a tiny little bit, and apparently that was enough for one more harvest. A few rearrangements before bedtime then, and since it is getting colder and colder, we are now also lighting up the campfire once more, as that simply has a bit more heating power compared to the dark torch, and we can keep it going off of Kipsaw's wood production alone. The night is getting too cold for our rice plants though, so Specs and Thoraya have to perform an emergency harvest on the plants they did not get to during the day. Not an issue at all though, since all of these are at 99 or 100% growth anyway. But this very clearly marks the point where we will no longer be able to rely on harvesting crops and berries to survive, so let's hope that we have stockpiled enough to get all 3 colonists safely through the winter. The following morning then begins with another quest that might be familiar, as the Deserter here is the quest you want to take if you want to have psychic abilities without playing nice with the Empire, and of course if you don't have the ability to use the anima tree for that. Accepting this quest would give us yet another colonist, and perhaps it is in fact a little early for that, but much more importantly it would also make us enemies of the Empire, and you probably know from the last series what those guys are capable of. So at the moment I am leaning towards just ignoring this, but I would like to hear what you think about it and also what you think about our relationship with the Empire in general. Should we play nice with them, perhaps even get a few royal ranks? Should we more or less ignore them? Or should we in fact go all out to become their sworn enemies? As always, let me know what you think in the comments below. Now moving on, Maniac here is mining a small bit of stone wall, once again not exactly to the approval of Thoraya, and just as he finishes we receive some fantastic news, as a Muffalo has self-tamed. Now at this point, after giving it the name Shadow Mage, congratulations by the way, we have a few options. We could either try to build a pen and keep it fed during the winter for that precious Muffalo wool, or we could slaughter it immediately for a big pile of meat and a good amount of fur. Once again, this is a decision that I would like to leave up to you, so should we invest some resources and most crucially some food to keep Shadow Mage alive until spring, or should we take the quick profit and not only keep our food to ourselves, but actually add the animal to it? While you have a moment to think about that, Maniac keeps mining and Kipsaw keeps making wood, and a few moments later our small shelter has grown a bit. Enough at least so that we can now put the research bench inside and immediately order complex clothing to be unlocked. At our tech level and with no one having any research proficiency whatsoever, this will take some time, but if we want everyone to be able to survive in the cold, we have no other option but to make our own clothing. Very importantly, we also want to have Specs make a wooden stool for the research bench, because in the ideology expansion, various pieces of furniture can have styles associated with our ideology. And this is actually a small issue with the table that Thoraya constructed, because she made that table in the style of her ideology, which is of course not the Cult of Jinx. For now, that thankfully does not cause too many issues, but going forward we want to make sure that we only make furniture that fits our belief system. With a cooking skill of 4, Maniac is currently also turning meat and rice into simple meals. The food poison chance at that skill level is actually slightly lower than eating the raw ingredients, not to mention that making meals is far more resource efficient. And yes, technically we could jump straight to fine meals for even more nutrient efficiency and a small mood bonus on top, but I feel like that doesn't really fit the overall aesthetic of our colony. Again though, let me know if you think that this is not as big of a deal for you, and I would be more than happy to make the switch next episode. For today, with a small hoopstone ring constructed and our colonists huddling around the campfire once more, I think we have reached a good point to make the cut. We are slowly getting to those points where we have to make lots of small decisions about the colony's direction going forward, so again, I would really like to hear how you think Liviana and the Cult of Jinx should develop. To perhaps help you paint that mental picture, we have lots of actual pictures to wrap things up today, as the fan artists in the community were once again very busy it seems. We are starting things off here with the return of Dr. Rove, who actually made a short comic strip this time, showing that moment from the last episode in absolutely amazing fashion. We also have 2 sketches from Ada Lynn, who submitted some artwork on the Pete Complete Discord, which you can join as a Patreon supporter, just putting that out there, and who was seemingly also inspired by the fight between Specs and Thoraya, as well as by the early demise of Fatty McCool. Special 3DD submitted this interpretation of Specs, which looks almost possessed and certainly leans into Specs' darker side, and I'm sure there will be many more moments where she shows that off. Speaking of a darker side, a longtime fan art contributor Chrysaor also posted this image on Discord, and I have to say, you have a talent for making things look downright scary, but that's probably a very fitting look for Specs and company. Teresi96 then sent me this wonderful piece, which I unfortunately had to censor a bit, as YouTube does not like nudity, but you can perhaps find the picture on her Instagram. Her username is on screen right now. Finally then, Johan Alex Merlici, I hope I pronounced that correctly, provided this drawing of Specs and Thoraya, capturing the more spiritual side of our colony. So to all of you talented artists, thank you so much for your submissions. This series is already off to a great start and being brought to life through your art, and I am super excited to see where the journey goes and what else we are going to see from you. With that being said, let's make the cut now. As always, if you enjoyed the episode, I would be very happy if you could leave a thumbs up. If you like what I'm doing and want to support me and my channel further, then you can go ahead and subscribe to stay up to date, grab some merch over on shop.petecomplete.com, or check out and maybe even pledge to the Pete Complete Patreon. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.